I grew up in the era of segregation, so all of my experiences early on were defined by basically by race. You know, if you got caught on the wrong side of Bull Street in some of the parks, then you got beat up. So they canceled those orders. So new orders came down, and these new orders says, you're going to Vietnam.
A lot of the subjects in my interviews have faced some form of adversity. And this is exactly the case for Robert Stevens, who faced extreme racism growing up in 1950s Savannah, Georgia, where music became his refuge. I first met Bob coincidentally when a package of mine was mistakenly sent to his house. This led to a neighborly friendship based on our mutual love for photography. In this interview, we talk about what it was like growing up in the South during segregation, being drafted to Vietnam, and becoming a professor of music. I hope you enjoy this conversation. Talk to me about growing up in Savannah in the 1940s.
I grew up in the era of segregation, so all of my experiences early on were defined by basically by race. There were five. I have four brothers and one sister, and so we had. You know, it was a kind of a difficult life. We were not wealthy by any stretch of the imagination, and so when one did something that would require some degree of wealth or whatever, it was shared in the family. In high school, my band director wanted me to start to play piano and organ in his R&B group, which I did. So that I shared. My brother, who is living in Jacksonville now, was a waiter in Savannah, and so he brought home tips. So that was shared. So that was how we sort of survived. My mother was a single parent, and we lived with our my grandmother, and my aunt, my mother's sister, and so they were the ones who raised us. And they decided very, very early on that education was really going to be the key for us, particularly for the boys. So they, between the three of them, my mother, my grandmother, and my aunt, they decided to issue a decree in the family. And the decree essentially was that each one of us would be guaranteed 4 years of college. And after that 4 years, you know, you were on your own. If you screwed up during the course of that period of time, you were on your own. I think what that said was that they placed a very high premium on education, and I think they were probably right about that. So all of us except one brother did finish college, and we moved on. In my neighborhood, all the people that I grew up with, I mean, we did the things that people in the South and Savannah love to do. We love to fish. We love to go crabbing, you know, and that was just a sort of a regular thing. I mean, fishing, there were not a lot of folks around who had boats. So while I was teaching in Waynesboro, one of the guys there had a boat. We'd go out fishing, but water moccasins are very aggressive snakes. And so when we would go fishing there, and also, you know, in Savannah, we'd take a shotgun. Because if you're on the banks, and the moccasins will often travel in pairs, and one of them I think is called a pilot. But if you're out and you're in their pass, unlike rattlesnakes, other kinds of snakes, that will try to avoid you, they will come. They're very aggressive. But yeah, I mean, those are the things that they were fun things to do. But there were other parts of it, of that experience, that in Savannah, that you also understood too. There were certain areas, for instance, Bull Street was sort of kind of dividing line.
Dividing line between races?
Yes.
Okay.
And so, you know, if you got caught on the wrong side of Bull Street in some of the parks, then you got beat up. So the white guys who also got caught on the wrong side of the street, on our side, they got beat up too. I had an experience once with my grandmother in what was then a Sears and Roebuck department store. And it just happened, I was with her, and you know, I was thirsty. So I stopped and I drank from the fountain. And my grandmother, who was a very, very religious woman, never cursed. went berserk. It was part of what she wanted me and my brothers to understand, that, there's certain things that you can't do because of who you are. There's certain kinds of behaviors that they made us aware of, and they wanted to be sure that we understood what it meant if we didn't do it. For example, if you were walking on a sidewalk and a white woman was walking, meeting you, we were instructed, step off of the curb and step into the street to allow them to pass it, so that there will be no misunderstanding about what your intentions are. They were very much influenced by what happened to Emmett Till and, and people like that. So this is a part of the socialization of growing up in Savannah. I was in a band, and I started in a band, even in upper elementary school. And initially I was in, intrigued by the band because a lot of girls were in the band. So my motivation was not purely aesthetic. Yeah. And that continued until high school, and then the band director at high school, Bobby Dilworth, he drank a little bit, but he was a good arranger, and he was a phenomenal. He is a phenomenal alto sax player, and he and his brothers had this R&B band, and he started me off playing keyboards with the R&B band. So we would we'd play what was called the blood and bucket or gut bucket series. Basically, what you were doing, you were playing at these clubs where if somebody had a little bit too much to drink, they got pissed off because somebody looked at somebody's girlfriend the wrong way, so that's why they call it. And then we also played a lot of we played a lot of what are called house parties, and so you go up into the country, and folks would have these shotgun houses, and they called them shotgun houses because when you open the front door and you open the back door, you could shoot a shotgun, and the pellets would go straight through the house because it's just a straight hallway from the front door to the back. That's what they call it, shotgun. But so the folks would cook food, and we'd play, and one of the byproducts of them hiring the band was that we got to eat, and of course, there was some imbibing that took place. My grandmother wasn't particularly happy about my doing this, and I will always think that part of her motivation for having prayer every Sunday morning was that I would be out Saturday night playing, and I guess this was her way of saying, you gave the devil his due last night, so you're going to give God his due this morning. And these prayers are very long. My brothers and my sisters are all sitting around the table. Oh God, we can do this. But yeah. So she wasn't particularly pleased about that. It was during that period that I was drafted. So I went into the Army. I was drafted, went into Fort Benning, and did my basic training there. And someone said, "Oh, you were a music major in college, weren't you?" And I said, "Yes." They said, "Well, why don't you audition for the band?" And I said, "What band?" I didn't realize that they had a band. Yeah. So I did. I auditioned for the band, and I got in. And it was kind of interesting because as a member of the band at Fort Benning, we would play the graduations. And I, on a couple of occasions, saw former students who were coming through in infantry. And of course, everybody at that point was going to Vietnam. But anyway, you have in the Army what's called a military occupational specialty, MOS. And everybody's MOS, the first MOS is infantry. And then after that, secondary. So mine was band. And so they put me in the band, and I played, all these ceremonies, and we would go around and do those kinds of things. And then I came down on orders, and the orders said that I was to go to Germany, I think it was Wiesbaden, and to be the piano player in that band. But they erroneously had me listed with the wrong MOS. So everybody, all my buddies in the band, oh man, you don't have to take that. Don't. Just tell them this the wrong orders. They cut the wrong orders, and so I did. I went to my CEO and I said, look, this is not right. This is not my CEO. He said, oh, you're right. So they canceled those orders, and I stayed in Colombia for another, I think, maybe 3-4 months. So new orders came down, but these new orders, they did get it right this time, and these new orders said, you're going to Vietnam. I was in the band, and one of the things that we had to do on a weekly basis, we had to play the Bodies Home. And so they would, and I was in a unit, the 1st Air Cavalry Division. So everywhere we went, we flew by helicopter. So they'd fly us into Saigon, and you'd have caskets, sometimes 2, maybe 3 stories stacked. And we'd have to play the ceremony to play them back. And almost always, we'd come back to our hooch and you drink. I mean, it was a very difficult thing to do. And then also, of course, being in the band was not necessarily a good thing to do for the other troops. They didn't like the band because they felt that what we were doing was, not really fighting. So we were a part of what was called the psychological operations unit, and we formed a unit, a circle around our base camp, and each unit in the base camp manned a bunker. Well, those guys who had been fighting in the jungle, who were in the bush, they were pissed. They didn't like the fact that they'd fly us out in these places, and we have what are called claymore mines, which are mines, you probably know them, you stick them in the ground.
Oh yeah.
So what they would do in the other bunkers, they would shoot and explode our claymore mines from the bunker. So that means then that you have a hole in your perimeter. So if you don't, somebody doesn't crawl out, and they have these huge lights that were lighting up the jungle. So if you're crawling out to replace that claymore mine, Charlie sees you as well. And so the snipers can take you out. And these guys are laughing on the Lima, the landlines. They're laughing because they know it's a hole, and they know somebody's got to go out there and replace them. Our commanding officer always wanted to send us out. I mean, we were the first to fly out on Chinooks. So that means we'd be on the helipad at 4 o'clock in the morning. It was cold as hell. So they'd fly you out, and this one particular instance, I remember they flew us out and into the jungle to play for these guys in this base camp. These are USGIs. They'd been fighting all night. So they had a sapper attack, and sappers would, and when they're going to attack because you can smell the hash. They'll sit out and smoke the hash for hours, and the reason they do that is because if they're shot, the pain is not as intense. They continue to come in. So they flew us out to this fire base, and they'd been fighting all night, and the fighting was intense because what they did was to stop them. They had to lower the howitzers down just about eye level. And they use a certain kind of shell, and that shell picks up debris from the ground. And so when we got there that morning, you could still see bodies embedded in trees, because the nails in the shells or whatever, they look like nails, would just embed. And so these guys have been fighting all night. So here we are, we're playing Windy. Ba, 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 ba. And they were freaking pissed. They were pissed. And so, that's what motivated a lot of them when they come back to base to shoot out our landlines. So, I mean, it's a very interesting experience. I mean, and you were sitting there at night, booze is very cheap, and and the weed was there also. But you're sitting there because you don't know what's going to happen. So everybody sits up all night. In our hooch, we had to dig a hole down at the bottom of the hooch. so that we could crawl in if we heard incoming. And you know it's incoming because they would shoot 122 mics, they used to call them, the long, skinny missiles. And you know it's coming because you can hear the sound. Doop. And you hear that sound, you know you've got just a few seconds to get into that bunker. And yeah, that would go on to 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning. At the Army at the time, had what's called an early drop period. That if you're in the service and you are, you've got the qualifications, to go back to school, they will let you out. So they let me out. I applied for it, and I got it. I received it, and so I was enrolled at Columbia, and I got a couple of master's degree there, and the GI Bill was actually not bad then. I think it's quite different now, because the GI Bill also provided financial resources for me to go back and get my PhD at Indiana.
Kind of words of wisdom, for just for life.
Never give up. Never give up. And if you persist, odds are things will work out in your favor. But I think that's the key. It's never give up. And that's what, my grandmother used to talk about. And this is a woman who had a 5th grade education, but understood the value of education and persistence. Doing the best that you can. That was the mantra that we heard all the time.